All right, let's go on here and take a look at the planning and tactics and compare these two campaigns. Again, powerful similarities and differences. In both cases, we're dealing with a siege. The siege of Yorktown and Toulon is under siege, but we're going to see totally different processes go on here. And so here you see the trenches that will be built, the parallels, the redoubts that the British put out in front of their siege fortresses. This is a broken up area over here. But let's, and this is the classic technique used against a siege. You go in and you build a series of trenches around the fortifications. Then you move your artillery in and you beat down the walls. Then you build another series of trenches around the entire thing. It could be the second parallel. And then you move up the heavy siege artillery and you begin to pound. The fire is going to come, the cannonballs are going to be coming in, enfilading here, and ricochet shouts. The devastation will be profound to what's going inside. Now, Rochambeau is very experienced in this uh, uh, type of warfare. He's had extraordinary experience. And here is an example of the fortress. And here, the first parallel, the batteries set up. The second parallel, the batteries set up. And then the third parallel, and then they're literally on the wall of the fortification. But again, this is a symbol of Washington and Rochambeau planning together, and realize the this is a great skill of Washington to recognize that Rochambeau's experience here precedes his, and while he may be in command, he defers to Rochambeau, the French leader, because he knows his skill set here is profound. And if you look at Rochambeau here, in 1747, he's involved in siege warfare and learns some key lessons from it. In 1748, he again is involved in a siege campaign and again learns substantially from it. And then again, 1742, 1744, in the 7 Years' War, he loses combats and sees the losses of combat and learns from those losses. We also learn more from our losses or failures than we do from our successes. And here you see what's happening in the Yorktown campaign and having the formal parallels, controlling the impetuousness of the American forces and the skill of the artillery. And we'll talk about the artillery later on. Very, very important. Washington, many people talk about Washington as the chairman of the board. The most constant reference is that Eisenhower fought as the commander of SHAEF, very much like Washington. And this is important for his success, and it's important in the success of him working with the Allies and how important that was. And so they learned from one another. Now, we haven't mentioned Duportail much, but Duportail comes with Rochambeau when he comes over, and he's an engineer, and he sets up and trains the Americans on how to set up and do siege craft and go forward. And so he directs as the British, as the Americans build their trenches, and he obviously as the French build their trenches, and the French troops had more experience on this than the Americans. And one of the things we'll talk to later is Duportail will will talk to, if you will, the educability of the American soldier, how well he learned, and they were surprised that the American artillery functioned as well as it did, and all of this is educated, as I said before. The science of artillery, the science of siege warfare, is very, very different than some of the other fields. I remember Baron von Steuben had come over and was at Valley Forge with Washington, and he was very, very important. So he's another example of Washington dealing with a foreign advisor and accepting his role and the importance of what he did. And so Steuben was important in training the American soldier and getting some degree of discipline to the American soldier so they could walk and go and train with the British and hold up against the British. Knox is another key figure in this. Knox was a very, very young man, probably as in his 20s as well, when he hitched up with Washington and offered to go up to when they were putting the siege on Boston early in the Revolution. He offered to go up to Fort Ticonderoga on an incredible mission and bring down artillery for the siege. And again, Washington recognized the audacity of what he had planned and let him go forward with it. And he went on and continued. He was a man who studied on his own. He was a bookseller, and he worked in, he had a bookstore in Boston, and he was an avid, voracious reader, again, as Napoleon was, and he educated himself from the reading that he went through there. So the educational system that preceded the siege warfare was really something. Now, Napoleon's tactics here are something that we've seen before. Now, if we look at this map, this is a map of the city of Toulon, and these are their fortifications around the city. And here are their outer works with their fortifications. And here are the the French positions. Here are the British positions. And then the men who were put in charge of the siege can only see this as a siege warfare and attempt to prepare, and we'll look at these commanding officers in a little bit, but they have no training, no experience in siege warfare, and they fundamentally don't know what they're doing. And what this is the commander of the siege at first. Carteaux, I believe, is how you pronounce his name. And he literally is a house painter. So he was in the chaos of the revolution and the chaos of the terror. He puts himself forward and is positioned for this and was totally unqualified for it. Now, this is the map that Napoleon sees. And what we were looking at before was Toulon. Napoleon looks at the Gestalt of the whole series, and he sees a harbor here and a harbor here, where the French, where the British and Spanish ships are anchored, and he sees this peninsula here with the high ground at the tip that is commanding that entire harbor space, and he realized, immediately that this is the key spot, and that this is the decisive point where the battle will go forward. And the other generals just do not have that vision. They do not see that. You could probably say that they didn't study the geography, and the contrast was that Napoleon probably studied the geography. So very, very different. So in battle after battle after battle, as we go forward, well, we're not going to go forward with Napoleon, but we'll look at some other campaigns of his much later. Napoleon sees the Gestalt. He sees the full scene. He's not myopic as some do, and only see what's immediately in front of him, and that makes it very, very different. And this is a different view of the same thing here, where this is the conventional view of just the siege works, and this is what Napoleon sees, where he sees that this is little Gibraltar here, what's called Little Gibraltar, that if he can take these forts here, then he can command everything that goes on there. And that's exactly, um, and that type of Gestalt will serve him very well as he goes forward with other. And this is another map, a French language map that shows what's happening here. The again, Toulon is here. The British and Spanish fleet comes in here. This is Little Gibraltar here. They're going to come in and take command of the inner harbor and the outer harbor and seize the city. The city was filled with monarchists, loyalists to the throne. And so when they came in, they landed with friendly forces there. And then these other maps show the collection of the forces from the French, and Napoleon will be coming down here. So you can see the difference in how they operate. All right, let's see if we can go forward with this one, and it will be long, but we'll go ahead with this. Key in this is artillery, and what is interesting again about this comparison is that artillery is the defining weapon in both of these battles, and it's interesting how it has gone through. And in artillery, in contrast to cavalry or infantry, training education is absolutely necessary because of the skill of it, and the skill comes from the math that's necessary, the reading of geography, even metallurgy. And as we said before, Henry Knox is our artillery leader, but what is good about him is he is educable. He is able and willing to learn from the French and what goes on here. And what is interesting with Knox is that Valley Forge, he puts together an academy to train for artillery. And he trains the men in the math that's necessary, in the geometry that is essential to this, in the ballistics, understanding the physics of what's happening. And these are all mathematical interests. He talks to them about fortification designs. He talks about siegecraft. All this is from book learning. He hasn't had any experience with this yet. Then the other thing he does, the same thing that von Steuben does, is they take them out and they work them in it. They don't try to do this as rote memory. They work with actual experience of working with the artillery. And remember, this is early now. This is Valley Forge days. Now, what's interesting for this is the genesis of West Point. West Point isn't founded until 1802, but the academy concept that is here, and the curriculum that is used here is the curriculum that's used to found West Point, because West Point starts out as an engineering school. So Knox is very instrumental. Knox in Washington's administration will be Secretary of War. Now, he's not in power when West Point is founded, but he certainly is a major influence in setting it there. And he has conversations with Jefferson, who was president when it's formed. And this is actually an illustration of the barracks that he builds at Valley Forge and sets up for educating men in the U.S. Army. And again, we see, and this is the quote that very, very key to von Steuben. And what's genius about him is that he adjusted to it. And his quote is very famous because it says, you cannot give American soldiers an order and expect them to obey it blindly. The American soldier will reason with you about orders. He will not blindly obey. If you explain to him why an order is given, he will execute it with intelligence and zeal. So you have to dialogue with the American soldier. The American soldier is different than the European soldier, and we'll spend more time on that later. Uh, Now Louis XVI sent Duportail to America early on. As I said, he comes over with Rochambeau, I believe, and his idea is to professionalize American engineering on fortification, shape the engineering culture, and he does this. And also, the whole hope of Louis XVI is to align America's operations with French strategic operations. And because he was successful in that. And but of course, before he could do anything with it, he lost his head. Now, the technology of 1780 is really quite important in this, and again, accidental. In our last session, when we talked about Overlord and Bakwashan, technology was a key element and very, very important to our analysis. Here in both of these battles, but certainly in Yorktown, the technology is important. And here's an illustration, again done by a Gemini, showing the siege cannons arriving in Yorktown from Rhode Island, which were absolutely essential in what goes forward. Now, the siege artillery that comes is very, very different. Now, I'll probably not pronounce this right, but Gribeauval cannons are new, and they're a French design, very, very different, and we'll talk to them, but they are large guns, 24 pounders, 18 pounders, 12 pounders, mortars, very large mortars. The French, the British artillery are field guns, and those are much lighter, and they just are not designed for siege work. And so when Rochambeau comes with these, he brings the charges, the whole system of what is needed. And we'll see what is so important about the new system, the reform system. So the American system, the field systems are just not up to what would be needed to knock down siege warfare. And the logistics that are necessary to support artillery is a substantial question and problem. And this is a photograph of a field artillery piece that the French would be using. And here's what's different in it. This is a French design. They're going to cast a strong piece of bronze. They're going to put that in a drill. They're going to drill out the center. And by doing this, the bore, the walls are going to be much, much less than for a simple pouring. But what goes on are the details that finish it. Besides the thinner walls, it's all standardized. So the vents are in a standardized position. The positions are precisely made up, so it's standardized. So one of the major differences is this. Let's see if we can do this. This elevating screw right here is very, very important because it gives much greater precision to how they can position it, and the standardization of parts. So the wheels are all standard, the housing is all standard, the framework is all standard, and not as it was with the British systems. So what is developed here and at work at Yorktown and also at Toulon is a French designed and invented. This is designed in 1765, so it's been around a while, but it's not being used by anybody else. This becomes really, really important in what goes forward. So the British pieces, as you can see here, the British piece uses a hunk of wood to come up with the elevation, very, very imprecise and moved off. And the pieces are 12 pounders, and 6 pound is much lighter than what the French will have. And they're outranged, outmatched, counter battery ineffective. They should systematically counter whatever siege artillery is coming. And the British artillery is going to be silenced in early October. This is an incredible difference in what goes on here. And so, as we said, the French guns are much lighter. The screw elevation is much more precise. The standardization makes it much easier for mobility. So Napoleon will use this to a great advantage in the wars that he wages, in the sense that he will move these. And this phrase is still used today: shoot and scoot. This is basically what the Ukrainians are doing in Ukraine. And so you want to shoot and then move very quickly before there's any return fire. So these three elements of the interchangeable parts, the rapid deployment, and the shoot and scoot capability will be important at Yorktown, and certainly important to Napoleon in Toulon. And again, much larger guns and bunker busters, as you can see, that will drive this. And so much faster emplacement, because everything is standard and the men know how to go from one to the other. So they're more accurate. They dominated the siege. And so this is really important, and what we'll see as we go forward. So the debates of this is September, the British withdraw into their forces, and the siege sets up in the beginning of October of 81, and the first parallel is dug up in 06, and October of 6, and look how fast these go. So October 9th, the bombardment begins. What is interesting, and we actually have images of this, Washington personally fires the first shell that goes off, and the bombardment goes on. And this is another interesting tale here that we need to do. We see here that they try to get a frigate to sail from Yorktown across the water on the other side to set up a relief way for Cornwallis to get out. And what the French do is they shoot what are called hot shots. These are cannonballs that are heated to a high degree, and then they set the ship on fire, and then the ship drifts and sets other ships afire. A devastating technique, and we'll detail that in some degree when we talk about Napoleon, because he uses it to an extraordinary degree. And so by October 11th already, the engineers have built their second parallel, and they're only 400 yards. Look at this recent infographic I just laid out. Some of the information on this you've seen, but 1,500 rounds in 9 days is extraordinary from the British fortifications. Now we flip to Napoleon, and what is he doing with his artillery? And again, the audacity and the luck and the skill he has is quite extraordinary. So here's an image of Napoleon at Toulon. So now look at his luck here with commanding officers. As I told you, what is it? Carnegie is the CEO that's appointed in August, and he's fired relatively quickly. He should be 93, not 73. And he's incompetent, and he's fired. Now, Napoleon is able to move because there's no commanding officer to stop him. So very quickly, another commanding officer is put in charge, I believe is wounded, is removed. But whatever it is, he's removed. And then finally, uh, a man comes in who has military experience and has siege warfare. Ducomont, yeah, I'm lousy in pronouncing French names. But he recognizes a genius, and this is what he writes back to the War Department or the Minister of War about Napoleon. Remember, Napoleon's in his young 20s. I have no words to describe Bonaparte's merit, much technical skill, an equal degree of intelligence, and too much gallantry. That's interesting, too much gallantry. Reward this young man and promote him because if he is not great, if he is not ungrateful, he will promote himself. An incredibly prophetic thing to say about Napoleon in 1793. Now, Napoleon is a master of psychology, and it's astonishing as such a young man how skilled he is in this. Uh, so there's a battery that's under such heavy fire because it's so close to the British ships that it takes heavy casualties. So Napoleon names it the battery of men with no fear. And so now men are fighting to go and show their heroism by going to this battery and at this advanced position. And so what does Napoleon does? He goes down and spends a night with them, again showing his lack of fear. And so then Napoleon is going to win and we'll talk about this a little later, but he wins in assaulting and capturing what's called Little Gibraltar. It's the peninsula sticking out into the harbor. And there are two forts out there, and he captures and conquers both those forts. We'll talk a little bit about that later. And then he starts shelling with his artillery into the harbor. Now, Napoleon, as we said before, fights from the front, and in these assaults to take these forts, he's actually wounded. A British soldier bayonets him, and some call it a bayonet call, some call it a spike, a pike. It really doesn't matter. He's wounded seriously. Now, what wins him accolades from his men is even after he's wounded, he stays in the fight and stays with his men on the battlefield, and they remember that. Now remember, Washington does the same thing. Washington, in the Battle of Monmouth, goes charging forward when his men are retreating, and he stands in the midst of gunfire, musket fire, and he scares his men because he's at such risk, and he turns the men around, and they return because of his courage. So you have two men here who are outstanding in their physical bravery, and it marks both of them. So they both show great showing. So what Napoleon is going to do very, very quickly is he is going to just destroy the British fleet. So here is hot shots. This is what they develop and design. So the hot shot is basically a furnace at the site. They're heating up these cannonballs to about 800 degrees, an enormous degree. Now, realize the craziness of this. You got a big charge of powder here, and you're about to put an 800-degree cannonball in there. You can't have it ignite this powder prematurely. So the wads of powdering that goes in here have to be wet, and you have to be very careful in the doing of this. And of course, you've got to handle the steel balls with iron tongs. So, and you've got to do it very, very quickly, so they don't cool off. So this is going to take tremendous skill. And one of the things that Napoleon does masterfully is he trains his men, and he's a superb educator in what he does. And this comes to a genius that we'll see. And the impact is the denial of this. And they'll throw, and we'll show this in a minute, they'll be shooting from the heights here, these hot shells, the hot shots, and we'll see what happens with them when they land. So here's the fire heating of it. But what's different is when they land in a ship, they lodge, and it's not the destruction they do by crashing in, it's the igniting of everything in the ship, because everything here is flammable. Or they hit the riggings and the sails and set those aflame. So the destruction that this does is truly profound. So here's an image again created from Gemini of Napoleon as they are loading hotshots. I remember the stupidity of what they do. The stupid cannon is aiming at the oven, which is stupid, kind of ridiculous, but you get the point of it. And here are the guns firing, and uh, often artillery fire prior to Napoleon was intermittent. He fires in volleys, so he concentrates the guns and he concentrates the fire, and that's another something that marks his future battles. So here you see all the ships gathered together under this hotshot cascade and doing tremendous damage to the ships. And again, as these ships are so masterfully damaged by Napoleon's strategy, they're sinking and they're abandoning the ships. And the ships are afire drifting. And so the drifting ships sail into other ships and ignite those other ships. So it's extraordinary. All right, we're going to stop there and pause this, and we'll next resume with the assaults.